How much money do you need to buy a bag of rice? Well, if you live in the South American country of Venezuela, you need over 2 million bolivars to buy a 2-pound bag of it. The paper bills weigh more than the rice itself. This is because Venezuela is suffering one of the worst cases of hyperinflation in history. Prices have been doubling every 26 days. The International Monetary Fund predicts the inflation rate may soon hit 1,000,000%. Some cities are suffering electricity cuts. Some don't have enough water. Food shortages are massive. Child malnutrition is at a record high. In 2017, nearly 400 children starved to death, and the average Venezuelan lost 24 pounds. About 10% of the country's population has fled as refugees. People are fleeing the kinds of economic conditions that you would normally associate with war. The only free market in Venezuela is the black market. So virtually everyone, on some level, is engaging in criminal activity. Family men find themselves smuggling contraband into Brazil and Colombia. Teachers, doctors, and petroleum engineers sell their bodies in prostitution. Formerly respectable people are involving themselves in drug trafficking. Gangs are recruiting teenagers by offering them something to eat. It is a failing state, and there isn't even a war to blame it on. So what happened? As late as 2001, Venezuela was the wealthiest country in Latin America. How did this nation turn into a humanitarian and economic disaster zone? This economic and political meltdown has some important lessons that even we in the United States must heed. In 1998, the Venezuelan people elected a democratic socialist named Hugo Rafael Chavez Frias. He promised to end government corruption and give Venezuela's wealth to the poor. He won the election with 56% of the vote. Chavez was extremely charismatic, and he handed out so many benefits to the poor. Over the 14 years of his presidency, Chavez took in an estimated $1 trillion in oil profits, and he used these to fund his massive social programs. He also nationalized thousands of private companies, saying the government would run them better than private owners. Many Venezuelans did not understand what socialism meant, but voted for Chavez because of his social programs. In addition to Venezuelan citizens, left-wing celebrities and academics around the Western world praised Chavez for showing that socialism can work. After the examples of the Soviet Union, China, Cambodia, North Korea, and other socialist states, liberals were eager for a real-world example that they could hail as a victory for 21st century socialism. In the United States, left-wing filmmaker Oliver Stone even made a documentary called South of the Border, where he praised Chavez's 21st century socialism. Yet to accomplish his reforms, Chavez did away with Venezuela's checks and balances. He took control of all branches of power: executive, legislative, judicial, and military. He eliminated the nation's Congress and replaced it with a National Assembly, which he controlled. He used this body to rewrite Venezuela's constitution to keep himself in power, lengthening presidential terms and abolishing term limits. He stacked the Supreme Court with those loyal to him. He effectively destroyed the private sector by confiscating or taking over one industry after another. These moves were popular at first, but there was a problem. The big government of Venezuela's socialist paradise grew strong enough to crack down on dissent. When journalists criticized the president, he had them jailed. When judges ruled against his decisions, he had them arrested too. When people protested, he had them locked up. Some of them were even shot in the streets. When his fellow military officers became uncomfortable with these tactics, Chavez imported agents from communist Cuba to spy on them. Before he died in 2013, Chavez picked his successor, Nicolás Maduro. And within a year, the inevitable happened. The price of oil dropped. Oil revenues shrank, and the real costs of socialism became obvious. As the late British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher said, the trouble with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. As soon as Venezuela ran out of oil money, its economy collapsed. Its per capita gross domestic product has shrunk 34% since 2012. The nation has gone from being the world's fourth wealthiest nation per capita to the 131st. Ruling over this wreck of an economy and wreck of a nation, Maduro is determined to hold on to power. He received 68% of the vote in Venezuela's 2018 election, even though 90% of his people live in poverty. This is puzzling until you learn that Venezuela blocked international election observers from participating, and that the British company that provided the voting machines found a discrepancy of at least 1 million votes between the vote participation recorded by the machines and the statistic announced by Venezuelan authorities. It is clear that democratic socialism has again produced authoritarian socialism. The government, big enough to give Venezuelans what they wanted, is now telling Venezuelans how they voted. The country is on the verge of civil war. Yet astoundingly, at the same time that this disaster is unfolding, just a few countries to the north, what's the hot political topic in America? Democratic socialism. An August 13 Gallup poll says 51% of Americans aged 18 to 29 have a positive view of socialism. Only 45% have a positive view of free markets. In the Democratic Party, 57% have a positive view of socialism compared to only 47% who are positive toward free markets. Democratic National Committee Chairman Tom Perez said that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, is the future of the Democratic Party. At a time when Venezuelans are literally starving to death because of socialism, Americans can still look at Venezuela and say, that is what we want for America. A majority of young Americans and most members of the Democratic Party are saying, in effect, we need to look at nations like Venezuela as a model for having universal health care, universal education, free college tuition, massive minimum wage increases, and redistributing wealth. You can make all of these ideas sound noble. That's why socialism is such a powerful force. But human beings have been trying these ideas throughout history. And every time you end up with disasters like the Soviet Union and Venezuela. When you give a leader or a government enormous power over the economy, as well as the military, policy, international relations, and everything else, the power to take from these people and give to those people, it leads to serious problems. Over and over again, leaders use democratic socialism to come to power, and then they consolidate that power and never let it go. Most democratic socialist revolutions throughout history end up becoming authoritarian. Many turn into full-blown dictatorships. These leaders always say they just want to help the people, but what they really want is power to remake the nation as they want it. And some of them just want wealth and power, and that's it. And whether or not people want to admit it, that is exactly what is motivating the socialist movement in America today. How widespread and how violent will this movement get? The history of socialism and Bible prophecy tell us the chilling answer. The people will revolt more and more until cities are burned with fire. You can learn more about how prophecies from Isaiah and other biblical books apply to America by reading